Hi, welcome back. I'm Terry Burns, and I'm making this particular video to invite you to join me in a new series I've started looking at novel or unconventional approaches to Enochian magic. Understanding that talking about unconventional approaches with a system that's already pretty unconventional is an interesting concept. So let me just let you know what I mean by novel approaches. Basically, in the last 20 years or so, as more and more practitioners have started doing Enochian, there has become a lot more material that available that just wasn't there when I started, particularly on Dee's heptarchic system and how it connects with grimoire and Agrippan magic, which is fascinating and wonderful, but it's not what I'm interested in here. What I want to look at are approaches that don't contradict that, but have nothing to do with it. And you may ask, of course, why Terry? Don't you use the heptarchic system? Yes. Why, yes, I do. I teach it even. But that's not what this series is about. This is looking at particularly some approaches that people employed in the 90s and early aughts that have been largely dropped because those people weren't part of magical orders or have passed away or something along those lines. So I'm also looking at approaches that aren't the same as Golden Dawn and Thelemic frameworks, but are not necessarily in contradiction with them. In fact, none of them are in contradict what you learn in those orders. These are just different lenses you can bring to looking at Enochian that I think make it more exciting. So, why I am doing this? Let me explain. And let me take you back 30 years. I'll only take you back 30 years for about 30 seconds, so bear with me here. I remember when first found out about the Enochian system. I was obviously much younger, but I walked in somehow to a group of people who were already magical adepts and doing all these amazing things. I was really excited about it. And it was like, well, how when you feel really drawn to something that is really, it seems really ancient, yet it's not, really precise, but I mean, no one understands its precision, and it's strangely alive, different parts of it seeming to talk to one another, almost like an energetic machine, or to borrow that term from Stephen Greer, I often use a consciousness assisted technology, a system waiting to be understood. It was the perfect challenge for the young me, and so I jumped in. But sadly, most of those people, since they were largely a couple generations above me, most of them aren't around anymore. And who knows, none of us will be around forever. So, in part, I'm trying to rekindle an interest in this among a younger generation so you can take it and run with it or put it to sleep forever. But anyway, I will tell you that there were unconventional approaches back then that I've totally discarded. I'm not going to bring any of those into our classroom, so to speak, here because one of the things as a lifelong teacher that I made a deal with myself and I've made it with many groups of different students that I am not going to teach things that I find either not interesting or that I'm not excited about. So things I've discarded myself, not going to bring in. But there were a core group of ideas back then that were radically different and really effective. They really amped up our Enochian temple when Alan and I built one, as we did very quickly after getting together. They improved our understanding of the system. They intensified the energetic presence of our temple space. Now, turning up the energy isn't necessarily always a good thing. I mean, you can stick a fork in an electrical outlet and that's not too helpful. But in this case, they amped up the energy in a way that made everything seem to run more smoothly. And they shared a common premise, which is that the Enochian system was somehow a gift to humanity from whomever, angels, extraterrestrials, light extruded from our own DNA, however you want to consider it, as a tool for evolution. And so a lot of the work that Alan and I did back in those early years involved approaching it within a structured way, but seeing, for example, how how would that make our lives in the world better? Not to work our will against someone. That's a really bad idea to do in Enochian, by the way. And so we treated our temple space as an installation. If you're in an initiatory, Kabbalistically based order, an installation that operated at the level of Tifereth in the world of Asaya, or if you're not in an initiatory system, just a system that worked for the benefit of all, from a place in your heart that felt harmonizing, and the system itself felt harmonizing. It was a place where we meditated, conversed with spiritual intelligences, sought healing, and explored consciousness. In the 1990s and early aughts, there was just a remarkable willingness to experiment. And I'm sure it's not gone. It's just not as prevalent. There were people doing this with Hebrew as well. If you think of the work of Stan Tenen doing this with the forms of Hebrew letters, other people like Darlene, who I'll interview later on this channel, were doing it with Enochian letters. There were researchers like Vincent Bridges proposing that such a language could aid healing and human evolution. He, with Darlene, wrote this complete Enochian handbook looking at the wild sacred geometry they clairvoyantly thought was there, or he did and she drew. He joined up with Dan Winter for their Enochian lifeboat project. The idea being to, give humanity a lifeboat before we destroyed ourselves and the whole planet. Within our own work, Alan and I looked at Enochian as operating at the quantum or informational level, that it's sort of being something brought in, extruded from the quantum foam, which I know quantum physicists would have quite an issue with the way I'm using the word quantum there. But there was all kinds of discussion then of quantum this, quantum that. And today we hear it with, Joe Dispenza or Robert Gilbert talking about quantum meditations. We looked at the possible influence of DNA and on consciousness, its role in developing capacities like astral travel, remote viewing that are common in Vedic practices, that are something you develop that they call the siddhis. We looked at geometric structures as standing waves rather than static forms. And actually, it was that part when we began treating sacred geometry as dynamic, self-organizing wave structures and multidimensional and higher dimensional shadows into the third and second dimension, the energetic effects of what we were doing intensified just dramatically. It was loads of fun. Now, many years have passed. Most of the people I work with in those years are gone. And I find myself missing the spirit of experimentation that defined that particular era of Enochian exploration. So this series in part is just an effort, like I said, to introduce some of those ideas to a new generation. As I explore these approaches, I invite you to adopt a beginner's mind, please. Rather than immediately deciding whether something is right or wrong, notice whether it's useful to your practice, and even more, whether it excites you, whether it makes you think, wow, that was a rush, let's do that again, or let's try it this way. Every model that I'm going to introduce here has strengths and limitations. None of these ideas can be proven, although if you're interested in empirically proving things, probably Enochian is not what you should be doing, just saying. But so these can't be proven. They can be explored. And in my humble opinion, exploration is where understanding begins. Exploration is a lot of fun. That's why kids love to explore. If you're interested in consciousness, symbolism, sacred language, and the evolving possibilities of magical practice as it intersects with the quantum field, you're in the right place. So please join me in the next episode, and we will have first a series of articles that I'm presenting, one by Alan and I, then several by other people, and then at the very end of this, I'll also link to some other videos that I've previously done that were kind of novel, or that my late husband did. So that's where we're going. Hope you'll join us. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.